If you're always looking for the exit door, that's just a sign of fear. If you're already unsure of what you're doing going forward and you're looking for where your exit is, you probably shouldn't be doing what you're doing.
What has been your approach to continue acquiring without selling? Has it been refinances? Has it been private capital?
Once I started buying some storage facilities, you're not dealing in $300,000 or $400,000. We were dealing in millions of dollars. It helped develop the courage to go in and buy even bigger properties and develop those into short-term rentals.
What are the go-to questions that you ask yourself as far as potential improvements that you could make to a property when you're evaluating?
You have to know your market and just understand that this is not a stagnant asset class. It's constantly having to reinvent itself in some way, shape, or form to serve the client better.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality. The purpose of this podcast is to bring entrepreneurs, investors, as well as operators to tell us about their stories, tell us about their insights, tell us about the lessons that they've learned along the way, as well as maybe some of the mistakes they've made along the way so that you don't have to make those mistakes as well. And today I'm very excited to have Jay Bowman, the owner and founder of Hayseed Capital, which is an investment firm acquiring short-term rental properties. So Jay, thank you so much for taking the time and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Jay, why don't we start with just a little background on who you are and how you got into, well, let's start with real estate investment as a whole, and then how did you venture into short-term rentals from there?
Sure. I started investing in long-term rentals in 2006, slowly acquiring and flipping. I dipped my toe in the water, wasn't sure how to do it, didn't have a mentor or anything like that, no formal education in construction, nothing like that at all. So it was a slow process for me. Did it for a couple of years. And of course, then the economy blew up because of the housing market, and what flips I did have, I couldn't sell because nobody would finance the purchases. So I ended up keeping quite a few of the flips that I had as rentals. And from there, I just continued to rehab and acquire or rehab and sell. And so I've done long-term rentals. I've got some college rentals, and then I've also dabbled a little bit in self-storage, but mostly my focus since 2018 has been in short-term rentals.
Okay. And how do you discover this asset class of short-term rentals, and how do you go from there to realizing this was what you actually wanted to scale?
Sure. I've been staying in Airbnbs, I don't know, since 2000, early. It had to have been since 2010, around in there. Never even considered that I could buy a property and operate a short-term rental doing it that way. I don't know why. It just never sunk into my mind. And then a friend of mine here locally purchased one, told me what he was doing, showed me what he was doing with this particular property and what the expected gross revenue was. And my eyes were immediately open to the opportunities here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay. That was 2018?
2018. Yeah.
Okay, good. And tell me, like, in terms of what you've found when you compare short-term rentals as an asset class from the point of view of a real estate investor versus everything else you've done, college rentals, long-term rentals, self-storage, what are the main particularities, perhaps challenges or even opportunities that you see in the asset class of short-term rentals specifically?
So I stood in front of a mastermind, I believe it was in 2019, explaining to them what I was doing. It's a fairly large mastermind, a lot of very smart people. And I would explain it to them, and they all looked like I had this third eye in the middle of my forehead. Like, what are you talking about? And my thesis essentially was, look, most people who are buying rental properties are looking and they're going, is this going to cash flow? Whether it's your 1% rule, or if it's a little bit or a lot, whether you're buying cheaper properties and hoping to cash flow a lot, or you're buying more expensive properties and cash flowing a little to nothing. I said, this is a fantastic opportunity to purchase really great properties at higher prices, and yet they will still cash flow because of the way that they are operated. And so I based my belief on that and continued to move forward purchasing those type of properties.
Love it. And I've sort of heard different ideas of or schools of thought when it comes to the following, which is There's people that still are looking at underwriting very conservatively their properties, even though they plan to put them as short-term rentals, but they still want to underwrite based on long-term rental income and kind of have locations in mind and property types in mind that worst case scenario can work as a midterm rental, as a long-term rental, if need be. Now, of course, those are probably going to be in markets that are less extremely touristic, right? Maybe more urban markets where there can be that kind of hybrid component. And then there's those that say, I want to go in all in on the tourism side, on the vacation rental aspect, and I won't have the option to perhaps have this deal pencil out if it's not a vacation rental, but I know that as a vacation rental, it will make all the money I need and more. So where would you say you're at in terms of your thesis?
I started off with the idea in the first few properties simply that same way. I said, well, if it doesn't work, then maybe I break even on a long-term rental. Or at the time, I'd never even heard of midterm rentals. I'm sure they'd been around, but until COVID happened, nobody really thought about it in the traveling nurses. I held that belief until I'm a big believer. At one point, I just decided we need to burn the ships. This is successful. And if I'm always looking for the way out, I won't be able to move forward with growing the business or growing the revenue that I really wanted to. And so at some point, I would look at a property and I knew that if it failed or regulations killed the short-term rental, it was not going to make it as a long-term rental or a midterm rental. But I decided that it was worth the risk. And so I burned the boats and moved on forward with the idea that these aren't going away. The regulations here in my city were tightening, but I stayed within the guidelines that I felt safe and moved forward at that point and purchasing higher end properties that would never cash flow as a long-term rental. They may have worked as flips, especially as we gained so much equity post-COVID, but as of right now, none of them, I don't think any of them would work as long-term rentals.
Okay.
Cash flowing long-term rentals.
Yeah. That's okay. So that's very interesting. So as you gain that confidence from seeing, okay, no, this model works. I just need to find the right opportunities. You were confident to go all in and not look for that way out. That's very interesting. Now, walk me through the timeline of you scaling your portfolio. As in, you start with one. By the way, has it all been single family properties that you add one after the next, or has there been some?
Yeah. So the first one we started was a duplex, and then we maintained single families up until 2022. We bought a duplex that we converted into a single family. And then in 2023, we bought an apartment building. And that's been our largest purchase so far. Louisville has some very specific regulations, and it's important that whatever market you are in, that you understand those regulations thoroughly and like the back of your hand. In September of 23, they changed our regulations again and made it harder for residentially zoned properties to become Airbnbs. We were getting overrun. We have quickly become a tourist city because of the Bourbon Trail. And so they wanted to protect those residential properties. However, they left the commercial properties wide open. So they said, we have different zoning classifications for commercials as every county does. And our C1, C2, C3, easy, and one type of OR, which is office residential property, were allowed to be purchased. And then you just go downtown and you just fill out some paperwork, pay $200, and you now have yourself a short-term rental. The niche that I discovered was if I knew the zoning of the property, in which most people don't know even where to go find the zoning of the property. But if I knew the zoning of the property and other people were treating it as if it was a single family residence, but I had the advantage of knowing the zoning, then I could grab it, pay more, and utilize it as a short-term rental without any sort of threat from the city in shutting me down. So that was a distinct advantage that I took at that point in time. So that's all that we focus on. It's a rather long and painful process to try and convert a residential unit into an STR usage. So we don't even want to bother with that.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So of course, looking at the zoning there, and in terms of the growth that took place, right? You have almost 20 active short-term rentals in your portfolio, correct? Around
Correct.
that.
Yeah, we currently have a 17, and I've got an 18th under contract currently.
Yeah. Okay. Love it. Now, one of the advantages, of course, of the long-term rental side of things, especially in multifamily, is the leverage you can get financing wise from traditional lenders, better loan to values, all these sort of things, right? On the vacation rental side is not, you cannot leverage yourself as much. Not every institution is going to recognize the forecasts of short-term rental operation. Maybe they see more risk associated with it. How have you navigated that? Just walk me through the timeline of, like, let's say when you're doing flips, okay, you sell it, and then with that you go and buy the next type of thing, right? In here, what has been your approach to continue acquiring without selling? Has it been refinances? Has it been outside capital, private capital? Like, what's been your sort of timeline when it comes to scaling your portfolio?
Sure. So at first, my first property, I partnered with a friend of mine. He is the co-owner of Hayseed Capital. And then he was done with one at that point in time. And so from there, I started to acquire on my own. They were more distressed properties when I bought them. And so I used my background in flips. I took the property, had a designer, fixed them up, prepped them, and then did a refinance because I had improved the property. I could get my cash back out of them. It's harder to do now, but that's how I was able to scale up at first. Once I kind of reached the end of my ability to do that and I wanted to go into higher end properties, I returned back to my partner and I said, "Hey, I'm buying this. Are you interested?" And he would come on board. And so he and I continued to do that for a couple of years up until last year when he and I together bought that apartment building with some retail in it as well. This next one is just me alone. So I
Mhm.
just utilized 1031 exchanges. I've used partners. I've used the Burr method in an effort to acquire these properties and hold them.
Got it. Now, you mentioned that the whole Burr approach, or yeah, I mean, like, refinancing, it's tougher nowadays, right? How do you go about looking for deals nowadays that can still have value add opportunity? Like, what's different in terms of how you need to look for opportunities that can work for that
Sure.
method now versus before, where you said it was easier?
Yeah, sure. So I will use a property we bought a couple years ago as an example. This was a duplex that had hit the market, and the upstairs unit, I believe, was a 2-1, and the downstairs unit was a 1-1. So I looked at that and I it was zoned correctly for what we wanted to use it for. And what I did was when I walked in, I saw what I was looking at and I said, if we take this duplex and we convert it into a single family, not a duplex, the kitchen on the second floor becomes a bedroom. The living room on the second floor becomes a bedroom. It was large enough that we could add another bathroom up there as well. And through the rehabbing of the property, we converted it from a 3-bedroom, 2-bath into a 6-bedroom, 3-bath. I believe we bought that at the time in a great area of here in Louisville for $325,000. And as a duplex, it kind of made sense at that price, but as an Airbnb, it's knocked it out of the park. So we've been really happy with the returns on that. Finding those advantages where you can see opportunity where other people don't is what I'm good at. I like to call it, I find these lonely orphaned children and I clean them up and then I turn them into these magnificent things that
Mhm.
that other people just don't see. It's some people just want to go in, paint furniture and move on, and there's no problem with that. That's a great opportunity. But I believe that you really miss it if you don't have the background in some sort of construction to take these other opportunities, put a little effort and time and money into it to really turn it into something else. So for instance, that particular property, I believe we bought that for $325,000. I think we put probably $100,000 into it. And last year it did $130,000 in gross revenue. So that was one that really knocked it out of the park. It was one of our best ones at that point in time.
When you're looking these opportunities, given your background in real estate and with flips and even construction and whatnot, is there some sort of mental checklist that you could share, or like you must go through some thought process of what are the potential renovations or changes to the property that could potentially add the most value, right? And perhaps most people, to your point, don't even know where to start looking for those, and so they just think of painting and changing the floors and doing some basic makeup stuff, right? So
Yeah.
what are sort of the go-to questions that you ask yourself as far as potential improvements that you could make to a property when you're evaluating?
Yeah, when we get a property, I brought in designers to help with that because I have no taste at all. I really need professionals to help out with that. So I've hired designers. Really, I like to make sure that these places are so good that if my wife walked into them, she would be happy or even thrilled to stay in a place like that.
That's a good
So
test to be the hardest test to pass, I'm
I
sure.
really want to have. So I don't like double beds. I don't like queen sized beds. I like king beds. And if
Mhm.
I feel I really want to push the room sizes to make sure I can get king beds in. There's nothing wrong with the other bed sizes. It's just that's what I prefer. So I want to maximize that bedside. We really want to focus on the amenities that come with a short-term rental. It's not enough for, I believe, a tourist destination just to be your average house. If you want to be your average house, you can go stay at your own house. And we want to create an experience for people when they walk in, they just go, wow. So I was explaining to a muralist who we're getting ready to do a mural in the courtyard of the building that we bought last year. And they were talking to me about what I wanted to see on the wall. And I said, look, I want people to walk out these doors into this courtyard and look at this mural and go, man, I'm so glad I grossly overpaid to stay in this place. I want them to be so happy with the experience that they have in our places that they come back again and again and again, over and over. And just being normal and just having an average decoration or average furniture and just like some fire pit shoved in the backyard, something like that, it just doesn't cut it for us. I'm really looking to push the boundaries and to do better.
And tell me, where does that mindset come from? I mean, first of all, I love the test, the wife test. If you would your wife stay there? And that I'm sure sets the bar very high. But
You
where
really
does
got
that
to have a high-end wife to do that.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. Listen, I think that it's a good test. That's all I say. But how does that mindset come about for you of not just wanting to just put a bed and just basic amenities as
Sure.
cheap as possible and just automate and throw it out there and see what you can get? I mean, is it because you just saw that, okay, there's better returns in going the extra mile, or was there really something in you that when it comes to, okay, I really want to give these people an experience, that was there a transition, or was that mindset there from the beginning?
Yeah, so no, it wasn't there at the beginning. And I think this is a two-part. I can give you an answer here. It's kind of two parts. One, there's a lot of people who want to be safe about this, and there's no problem with safety. And they buy one bedrooms or two bedroom homes. There's a couple, because one, they could probably long-term rental it at the prices they bought it for, or midterm rental it, and they feel safe. Not a problem. I don't like those. I don't want to play in the hotel market. And 1 and 2 bedroom homes play in a hotel market. And if the hotels wanted to crush 1 and 2 bedrooms, they could absolutely do it. They could plummet prices. If you want to stay in a 1 bedroom house, that's fine. Or you can go stay in the the hundreds of rooms, thousands of rooms that are going to be available at and probably with some better service in a smaller house. I just don't see the value add in that, other than you get to say, well, I get to say I have an Airbnb and I'm dealing with 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms. A lot of people enter into the 3 bedroom market, and that's a highly competitive market because a lot of people can afford a 3 bedroom house in my market. So when I speak, I'm speaking specifically of mine. A lot of people could afford a 3 bedroom house, and so they bought those. And when they did, it saturated the market at bedrooms on a smaller level. So your one, twos, and threes were not where an area that I wanted to play. I have some of those, but I really decided to focus on the larger properties that would keep investors who were only dipping their toe in the water halfway. I didn't want to play with them. I wanted to play with bigger properties, less investors, and provide a higher level of experience. And that required me to purchase 4, 5, 6 bedroom properties. We're limited in Louisville to sleeping 12 per property unless you have a special permit from the city. So we really focus on just those. I had another friend who had purchased a larger property and rehabbed it, and he just blew it out of the water. It was gorgeous. Essentially, there isn't even a living room. It's just a large bar. I told him that if one day they shut down his Airbnb, he could just operate the place as a bar. It was so nice. It really, really leveled up. And I thought, my gosh, he's going to lose his shirt. They spent so much money on this place, and instead they blew it out of the water. So at that point, I decided that if I was going to play, I had to cut my fear off. I had to take that fear and just throw it away and really level up and attempt to do bigger things. Once I started buying some storage facilities as well, you're not dealing in $300,000 or $400,000. We were dealing in millions of dollars. And at that point, it helped develop the courage to go in and buy even bigger properties and develop those into short-term rentals that really provide a much higher level experience for the people who visit Louisville.
Yeah, so by virtue of going into this new territory of larger, better properties, you kind of had to change that mindset and start focusing on that guest experience from the get-go.
Yeah, if you're always looking for the exit door, that's just a sign in my mind, that's just a sign of fear. If you're already unsure of what you're doing going forward and you're looking for where your exit is, you probably shouldn't be doing what you're doing. You want to be confident to move forward into bigger and better areas and to grow in those areas and to not look backwards. If you're looking backwards for that exit, maybe that market's not for you. Maybe this asset class isn't for you. You need to learn from the people around you and then step into those areas. And that applies to all things. It doesn't just apply to short-term rentals. It applies across asset classes. Like if you're just looking, how can I get out of this if I fail? I believe I've already got the wrong mentality.
That's so interesting. And how did you push through that fear? I mean, you've mentioned that word fear, and I think it does come down to that because you're looking for a way out. You can call it trying to be conservative. You can call it try to do risk mitigation, whatever you might want to call it. It is fear, right? How did you overcome that and got into those larger territories? Is it just like, what was it in your case?
I think it was just over time when we started small. Like I started with that duplex, little 1-1s, and then I moved into rehabbing a 5-2, 5-2, 3-2. I think after a while, honestly, I just kind of looked around and said, I think that I know what I'm doing and I have the confidence to move forward into the bigger properties. The numbers scared me a little bit at the time. So I went in and bought 300,000, 400,000, another 300,000. And then by that time I was dealing in even larger numbers in another asset class. And I realized that numbers are numbers. It doesn't matter as long as the ability to purchase them and execute and have faith that my experience and then my confidence and knowledge base is there. I was able to move forward and not have those fears. I don't have those fears today. If they do show up, I try and acknowledge them as quickly as possible and just answer them back with the knowledge that I have, the confidence that I've gained, and knowing the market that I know. If I moved into a different market, I would have different fears because
Mhm.
I know my market like the back of my hand. I don't know your market. I don't know any other markets in the United States like I know Louisville. And I'm very, very confident in this city and its short-term rental market.
That makes sense, and I guess it also comes from just getting to new levels of even within the same market. Like just like you mentioned, the latest deal you did has been the largest, the apartment building, right? So I'm curious to know, like, because you can achieve a certain comfort, quote unquote, or confidence level. Let's say doing single family properties, and you've been doing a couple of those, and that's working out. Now you venture into something bigger, larger. What was different about that apartment building? Whether it was the way you had to find it, the way you had to finance it, the way you had to structure the deal. Like, was there anything different there than what you were used to doing previously?
Well, yeah, I would say the largest property we'd bought up to that point was probably 2,800 square feet. It was like a 5.3, I believe, a pretty large property for a single family residence. This particular property was 13,000 square feet. It came with 3 retail units, storage garage in the rear, and 7 apartments. And some of the apartments were already being utilized as short-term rentals. Some of them had long-term tenants in it. And so as soon as it came on the market and I identified it, it was zoned correctly into a commercial zoning, not some multifamily residential usage, but commercial usage. I toured it with the broker. There was another buyer there as well. And I went through and I was like, this is amazing. I'm a sucker for old buildings. They are a punishment when you're dealing with in Louisville, which is really old city. You're dealing sometimes with buildings that are 150 years old. And this one is one of those. It's an all brick building. And I just walked through it and I just knew it. I saw the way that it needed to be put together. I knew that it was going to be a great long-term investment in a very specific area of town. I only buy in a handful of zip codes here in Louisville. I'll leave those other zip codes up to everybody else. I only want the areas where people want to actually be and to go to restaurants and go shopping and go out and have parties, things like that. I'm only looking in those areas. And this just happened to also be in that area, in an up and coming area in one of those zip codes. And I saw it, I knew it. It had a $1.8 million price tag on it. I tried to convince my wife that I should just be the only one who bought it, but she did not like that idea. It scared her a lot more than it scared me. But I called up my partner and his wife questioned him heavily on the investment as well. But in the end, we both had the confidence that we could step into this property and do really well. And we converted 7 units down to 6. So we took, once again, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and converted that into a 5-bedroom, 2-bath. And it will drive a much higher revenue than it would have if it was a smaller unit. So that was one of the biggest changes. And then we had another unit that was just trashed, and it took us quite a while to get that one done. But it's probably one of the better units that we have at this point as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath.
And what are the metrics that you're looking at when you're trying to underwrite, in the sense that, especially when you're going to be doing some major renovations, right? You're going to have, well, not only all of your closing costs and whatnot, but you're also going to have that renovation period, if we
Yeah,
want to call it like that, where there's going to be a lot of expenses and whatnot. Are you looking at a certain sort of payback period where you want to make sure that after certain number of months or years or whatever that might be, once you're operational, once you're stabilized, you're recouping that investment? Are you just getting, I don't know, financing that is interest only for the time of the renovations, and that allows you to do it? How do you go through, how did you go through that for this particular
sure.
deal?
On that, so this one was a little, I'll tell you, a normal deal. I've developed relationships with lenders in town for a while. They know who I am. When I say this is what I'm looking at, this is what it's going to do, relationships with commercial lenders or commercial brokers mean a lot. It's not like you're buying a residential property that you're going to live in, where it's just straight hey, just bring us your documents and we're good to go. As long as the documents work, we're fine. Commercial, they need to know you, they need to trust you, they need to understand you. And I've developed those relationships over time. And so a number of those lenders offer construction financing, construction to perm financing, and we've looked at that. This larger building at the time, we wanted to move fairly quickly on it. And so we actually at the time used a hard money lender to purchase that. So at 12% and a point on a $1.8 million purchase, it was pretty significant. We wanted to close very, very fast. And so we executed on that. And then at the same time, as we executed the purchase and began the rehab, we had already started a refinance with another lender to try and get out of the hard money loan, because it would have been unsustainable over the long period to be paying 12% on that large of a loan. So we had the rehab money. Once we refinanced out of the hard money lender, we still had the rehab money. We went in and began to tackle the building bit by bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes sense. And was that what are some of your lessons or suggestions when it comes to dealing with hard money lenders and doing it right? Because it can be dangerous, right? If not executed properly.
With hard money lenders, speed is everything. It's just expensive money. And it's ease of transition. It's smooth. They make it easy to get their cash, but you pay for that ease of transition. And so paying those high percentages or paying those high points is just part of the game. But getting in and out as fast as you can is really important, because if not, that interest will stack up over time and eat into your profits. The good news is that when your timeline of holding the property is forever, or 20 years or 15 years, even the higher interest that you're going to be paid looks minimal over the long-term gain of the appreciation of the property, the pay down of the loan, and then the cash flow that should come with that property. So getting in and out of that lender is the priority, but also if it takes a little bit longer, in the long-term scheme of things, it's not the worst thing in the world to take a little bit longer to do things right inside of your project.
Right. You just want to make sure that you do have a clear way to pay them back out, right? And so on that note, was that refinance based on the sort of after repair value, considering the fact that, like, considering the revenues also, like from the fact that you were going to make all these changes and optimizations and it was going to be rented as a short-term rental? Or do you just go based on like the building value just from the renovations that you would be making, regardless of what type of income that be making?
Sure. So on the properties that are single family properties, it's pretty easy. You can run comps in a neighborhood to determine what that house is worth. It's not going to change based on the revenue that you're bringing in or not bringing in. It's kind of like when you buy a long-term rental. It doesn't matter that your property is renting for $1,800 instead of $1,600. The appraiser does not care. It's all about what sells in that area around that other single family residence. When you're dealing with commercial property, specifically this building, because it was an apartment building, you step into commercial appraisals, and commercial appraisals look at three different ways of how you can appraise that: the income approach, the value approach. I can't remember what the other one is right offhand. The problem with operating construction is they don't have any guidance on how to value buildings that are short-term rentals. Doesn't matter. So you can go, look, this thing's going to do 120,000 a year, or these combined units are going to do 300,000 a year, as opposed to being a multifamily where it may only do 180,000 a year. They don't care. There is no guidance, no way for them to judge short-term rentals in structures like that. So they ended up having to appraise that as a multifamily structure. Commercial appraisals are more expensive. They take longer to do. And it came out that I believe this thing, we bought it for 1.8, and we did overall, I think we did about 300,000 in rehab. And it came out in the appraisal, the after repair value was going to be somewhere like 2.5, something like that. And so we were still happy with that. The lender was comfortable with it as well. They knew me, they knew what I'd done. And so we converted as quickly as possible out of that hard money loan into the other financing. And they gave us 6 months of interest only, I believe, to help with those payments. We had actually we're just going to use that lender, but the timeline and getting it closed was not what we wanted. It was going to take them 6 weeks. Hard money lender, where they really pushed it. I think they got it closed in
That's very interesting. That's super, super interesting. And I think I love how specific we went on the approach. Now, one of the things you talk about, or at least you have mentioned in your social profiles, is the fact that you not only invest in short-term rentals, but you invest in tax advantaged short-term rentals, right? So tell us a little bit about that tax advantage component. What do you look for? What have you learned? What do you use? Best practices and takeaways when it comes to everything that's possible there.
Yeah. So I'll start that off with the real advantage that I have is that I am classified by the Internal Revenue Service as a real estate professional. I've been doing real estate since 2000 as a real estate broker. I've done mortgages. I've done long-term rentals. I've done all of this. My full-time only thing that I do is real estate. And so I'm classified as a real estate professional by the Internal Revenue Service. My income is just that. When I bought these properties, I had not considered doing cost segregation studies, but then and I can't remember the name of the program that the Trump administration set up, it provided accelerated depreciation in businesses. So we usually in depreciation, you have your schedule of what certain items of a property is worth. Like you can depreciate a window over 5 years. And I'm making these numbers up, but you got your 1, 5, 10, 15, 30-year schedules, and the property depreciates over time, its useful life. Well, what they said with the new program was anything that was 15 years or less could be accelerated, moved up to year one, and you could take 100% of that at the time. And so, for instance, if you had a $400,000 house, we found that it was going to be about 25 to 30% of the purchase value. We were going to, instead of waiting to get that depreciation over time and to use it to offset our income, we could do a cost segregation study, get the accelerated depreciation, and I would get on a $400,000 purchase $100,000 of depreciation to $120,000 of depreciation in year one. And it would essentially wipe out all the income. So I took my entire portfolio one by one and completed cost segregation studies on that and wiped out a very, very, very large chunk of my income over a period of years as that depreciation sits there. And so people who are real estate professionals get to do that. If you are married to a real estate professional, your income also gets affected. So my wife's income, my income together, I took all the depreciation. It wiped out hers, it wiped out mine, and we move forward. If you don't have that status, it's only going to affect the profits from real estate that your passive income, that's what it'll be classified as. It only affects your passive. It won't affect your W-2. It won't affect risk. It won't affect your capital gains. It will only passive income. And so we've really focused on doing those cost segregation studies and wiping out our income using what we would have paid in taxes to go and reinvest into other opportunities.
So basically the accelerated depreciation is still available even if you're not classified as a real estate professional. It's just that those tax benefits won't be passed on to your other sources of income, right? They'll stay within whatever's passive.
If you're not a real estate professional.
You're not a real estate professional.
And the IRS has some really specific rules about that. And it is changing, and it's slowly going away. You can still do cost segregation studies, but the accelerated part and the percentage that you can take is leaving. So in 2022, let's say there was that $100,000. In 2022, you would get 100% of that $100,000. and you could use that against your income. In 2023, you would only get 80% of that. So you'd only get 80,000 of the 100. In 2024, you're only going to get 60% of that $100,000. And it keeps going down for the next 2 years until that number is zero. Recently, I believe somebody tried to pass a bill to renew that, to take that accelerated depreciation back up to 100%, but I believe it was voted down. And so you never know what you're going to get. So right now we're just playing the hand that we've been dealt and then using that to offset income and then reinvest the taxes we would have paid into additional properties.
And is there anything that is unique to short-term rentals and vacation rentals as far as tax advantages goes?
So I believe, once again, this goes back to how properties are classified. Single-family residences are classified on a 25 and a half year depreciation schedule. In my mind, when I look at a property, people look at a structure. Let's just call it a structure. People will look at a structure and they will say, that's a house. And I tell them that is wrong. I said, you are saying in that instance, the tail is wagging the dog. It is the zoning of the structure that determines its usage. And while it may look like a house, its zoning says it can be retail. It can be a restaurant. It can be a barbershop. It can be any number of things because the zoning says it can be. And so the structure may look like a house, but it's not a house. Appraisers, though, they don't really do that. If they look at it and it looks like a house, they say, looks like a house, smells like a house, walks like a house, it must be a house. And so they will put that on a 25-year depreciation schedule as opposed to a commercial property, which is on a 40-year depreciation schedule. So it takes longer to depreciate commercial property than it does residential property. And while the short-term rentals are clearly have a commercial usage to it, the structure itself is being depreciated like it is a residential property as opposed to a commercial property. Now, the apartment building we bought, that falls into the commercial area, and so it's being depreciated as such.
Got it. Okay, that's very good. Now, let's say with all you've done, all you've learned, like let's say you're giving advice to someone that's wanting to scale a short-term rental, vacation rental portfolio, investment portfolio like you've done. What would you say are some of the biggest lessons or mistakes you've made that you would have liked to avoid, or just things that you were like, man, I wish I knew this when I was starting out?
Yeah, really investing into your amenities, really investing into the design of the property. That's really, really important. That's really the number one thing. One thing that I see right now that a lot of people are doing is they will go out and there's so much exuberance from investors wanting to buy short-term rentals. And you can go buy a whole bunch of them today and you're going to lose your hat on them. You're going to lose money. They'll say, oh, you're going to make 100,000. We're selling this for $1 million. There you go. That's just not going to work. That there's no way that cash flows unless you just are just rolling in money and you're putting 50% down or 40 or 30% down, something like that. You really have to know your debts, the debt of the loan and what that's going to cost you. Management's going to cost you. I believe our expense ratio is something like, it varies between 35 to 45%. That's before debt service. And so if you go, okay, well, right off the top, most people don't know how to manage these. If they hire a manager, it's going to cost a lot. It's usually between 15 to 25%, depending upon where you are. It's going to eat a lot of the profits. And if you go, I'm going to lose roughly half the profits to expenses, you better make sure if you want to cash flow that you're going to have a debt, or your mortgage payment is going to be significantly less than the 50% that's left behind. When I'm just doing back of the napkin, look at the property, if I go, hey, I think this thing will cash flow $100,000, I today do not want to be in that property more than 500 to 700,000, just because of the cost of debt right now. So on smaller properties, it's usually lower. On larger properties, I'm willing to pay more of that ratio. That's 7x. Smaller properties is usually a 5x. I feel really fortunate if I find a 4 or a 3x. That's what it used to be. It's not that way right now because the cost of property has gone up so much. But knowing those ratios and knowing, hey, if I'm just looking at a place and somebody says it's going to do 100,000 and I'm confident in that 100,000 and they're selling it for $1 million, I just pass by it. There's just no reason for me to look at it. It's not going to cash flow. Putting 20% down and with debt at 6.75%, it's just not there. And yeah, I could manage them on my own, but I like my time and I like the freedom that I have. And so we utilize third party management for those. We're better at finding deals and getting those deals ready than we are at managing those deals. So we specifically really just focus on identifying properties. And when we do that, we know right offhand what it's going to rent for gross and what we are willing to put into that property to make sure that we make the profit that we're looking for.
Got it. So rule of thumb wise, you're saying you're looking at wanting to pay no more than 7 to 8 times the
No, I
gross.
wouldn't even go 8. It's 7x is the highest that I would be willing to go.
7x, 7 times the gross bookings for the property. Now, when you're looking at properties that have a lot of potential, but that potential is unrealized, like you do need to put in some good amount of capital to renovate and get it to that level. I mean, there's the idea of like being willing to pay a little bit more or more for something that has the potential, but there's also the idea of like you're buying what's there today, right? Like you should be technically evaluating the place based on what it's worth today. So when you find those rare opportunities, how do you think through how much more you should be willing to pay depending on how much potentially you see upside wise and also how much renovations that potential is going to need to come to fruition?
Yeah, the easier the property is to prepare, the more I'm willing to pay. It's a matter of speed. At that point, I'm willing to take that property and move fairly quickly to get it ready, to get it operating. If it's a large project, I am going to be far more stingy because as you begin to tear into 100 to 150-year-old properties, your surface level stuff is easy to see. It's the things that are under the surface that you don't see that are going to come and bite you. And so you have to understand, hey, my budget may be on a rehab $70,000 to $100,000. Oh, by the way, I just inherited a $20,000 problem one way or the other, whether it's a sewer line or a complete rewire of the building or you name it. You're going to start opening up things and you're going to discover those things that maybe you didn't see beforehand. And so I like to keep a nice cushion in my assumptions of what it's actually going to cost to rehab those properties and get that ready. And so I'm just very careful and conservative when it comes to that. So it makes me more conservative on what I'm willing to pay. But I have the mentality of this isn't a flip property. This isn't a long-term rental property. This is a short-term rental property that I plan on holding for a very, very long time. And if those things come up that all of a sudden snag, go, well, there's $5,000 I didn't expect, or there's $10,000 I didn't expect, I don't get bent out of shape about it because my mentality is I'm holding this thing for 20 years. Or I have a portfolio of them, and maybe my hope is eventually private equity steps up and goes, these short-term rentals around the country are making too much money. We have to step in and buy these for their own investors, and they're willing to come into the market and pay a premium for those properties. Either way, I'm looking at either a very long-term hold or a higher exit than maybe other people are willing to consider. And so I don't get really been out of shape about the surprise things that come, but I try and plan for them in my budget when I'm looking at by usually 10 to 15%.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Now, Jay, you have done a few deals with your partner, and it seems like if you've continued doing them, I would assume they've been successful, or at least you've found a way to make it work. If it's not the case, we can skip the question. But yeah, what have you learned about making partnerships work in real estate? Like do's and don'ts. How do you structure it? How has that structure perhaps evolved as you've done more deals? Yeah.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
So I had partners are a funny dance to have. My particular partner on the short-term rentals, he lives an hour and a half away. He's not here. He's not on site. He puts a lot of trust into me in the acquisitions that we're making. And we've done it enough times that he has that confidence. I really don't hear much from him concerning that side of the business. I carry a majority of the load, but if I need him to do something, he takes it over. So right now he's handling the murals on the building. He's negotiating and talking to the people about getting those murals painted. If I need him to handle other things like, hey, I'm busy. Can you get the internet wired and set up? Can you do this? Can you do that? These smaller things, he's able to handle those. Obviously, construction is not something you can do easily from an hour and a half away. You really need somebody full-time on site looking at that at any given time, or at least have boots on the ground giving you that information. In the other businesses I've had partners in those. It's just, you have to define the roles that you will have. And so in for instance, in storage, I have a partner, and at the beginning, we were stepping on each other's feet in tasks, and he was doing it and I was doing it. And then we found we were both doing the same task. And so we realized really quickly, you have to break down those roles and say, okay, here are the roles that we see. These are the ones I'm going to take. These are the ones that you're going to take. And you want to make sure that those roles fit those partners very well. You don't want somebody who's shy and doesn't like getting on the phone and doesn't like talking to people being part of the acquisitions team. That's not going to work. They're better off doing something else. Or you just need to understand that some people are more organizationally talented and other people are more outgoing and sales talented, and you want to make sure those roles are divided up properly amongst the partners. It's gonna save yourself a lot of heartache from the very beginning, and you have to be able to trust that partner. If you don't know that person, you don't know their character, you have no business getting involved with them. You really want to know that person and trust them and understand who they are when things go bad. When things are good, it's easy. It's when things go bad that you really need to be able to know who your partner is and trust them. Because if they flake out on you when things get hard, you're left holding the bag, and you can't force them to work, and maybe they just ghost you and you're gone. So you need to understand how those people react when interest rates skyrocket and all of a sudden profits disappear, or people move out, or name the number of problems that you can face when you're dealing with real estate. You need to understand your partner's reactions and how they're going to handle that situation.
Oh, that's huge. And I think that the aspect of having complementary skill sets is also crucial. I mean, having two people doing the same thing, like, why would you need that partnership, right? If you both have the same skill sets and are doing the same thing, like, there's no need for a partnership, right? But unless you can complement each other's skills, then that's where a partnership becomes very, very powerful. What's ahead for you, Jay? What's the vision that you have moving forward? Where do you want to see yourself and your portfolio, your business in the next 5 years?
So in the Louisville market specifically, our tourism board has stated we don't have enough hotels. And the planning and design department, if you have a hotel and it wants to get built and you've got the money, they're approving it. There's hundreds and hundreds of rooms being added to the Louisville, Kentucky market over the next few years. They're really wanting to compete with conventions that Nashville or Indianapolis or Cincinnati are getting. And these conventions have literally looked at the city of Louisville and said, you don't have enough hotel rooms, we're not interested. And so they have opened the floodgates to approval of hotel rooms for those conventions to come into town. Because of that, we're going to have more opportunity, more people coming. Not all of those people are going to want to stay in hotel rooms. And so I continue to focus on looking for larger properties that will hold really a minimum of 8 at this point, up to 12. And if I can find larger properties, I still may try and get permission from the city to sleep maybe 14 or 16. But right now, that's my focus on the larger scale. In the long-term view of things, I think there's a lot of opportunity in other markets that are untapped. I've just been very busy where I am right now on my own. Our mutual friend, Taylor Jones, has a great team through TechVestor, and they've been just tearing it up, going into other cities. But even in my conversations with him over time, he's like, look, it only makes sense for them to even enter a market if they can take a quantity of properties down all at once. So they don't want to step into a new market and do 1. They need to be able to step into a new market and do 10. And so if you take that lesson, you have to be able to say, okay, do I really want to, over the next year or two, heavily invest in another city and then build the infrastructure to support those investments in those other cities over time? I think that there's a lot of value. I learned a lot of lessons from when I got into some self-storage assets in 20, I want to say that was in 2019. I started looking at those as well. A majority of the self-storage industry at that point, 70% were still owned by mom and pop owners. There was a lot of opportunity in mismanaged assets that you could get at a great price. And then we rode the wave high into self-storage becoming a huge, huge asset over the last few years. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in mom and pop hospitality right now, where these individuals are turning 70 or 80 years old and they don't want these anymore. They want to retire. They want to sell them and ride off into the sunset, but their kids don't want them. They don't want to be there doing that. And so I believe that there's opportunity in those types of properties as well in the long run over the next few years.
So mom and pop hospitality, as in like hotels, motels, things
Yeah,
of that nature.
strategically placed motels, single story, 10 to 20 doors. They're all there. They usually lived on site, so I think that there's opportunity there. Not so much the hotels. I'm not a fan of those. I think that you see the explosion of hotels, and some of those are going to survive. I think the long-term industry, when it comes to cheaper end hotels, multi-storied hotels, is they'll end up being converted in some way, shape, or form to multifamily affordable housing. That's just a personal opinion of mine. There's no differentiation between any of these brands other than their location on highways. And after a
Mhm.
while, they're going to saturate themselves. The rents will drop, or the nightly rates will drop. And what are you going to do? If you can't afford the debt that the building is carrying, you're going to have to sell it. And I think a lot of times those are going to end up being converted to studio apartments. That's
And
just a
is
personal
that
opinion.
and is that what you see for more like budget type of hotels? Like
Yeah.
you think it's only perhaps the high end ones or that
No,
will
I think the high
survive?
ends will survive.
Yeah,
The high
the
ends will
ones that will
survive.
survive. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's always going to be the people who have money are always going to want quality. And so as long as they maintain their quality, the high end hotels, the boutique hotels will survive. It's the mid range or lower range that will end up over time converting. I've already seen that in a couple places. South of me in an area, there's an old hotel that is now essentially a weekly rental. They've thrown kitchens in there, microwaves. They keep it pretty simple, but
Mhm.
that's what it's become. It's become a large multifamily hotel where these people stay on a nightly basis or a weekly or a monthly basis. It's become their house. I think that we're going to see a lot of those conversions over time into that.
Yeah, and I'm also fascinated by just seeing like the playbook that big hotel brands have executed of starting by owning the real estate, but as they've gotten bigger and have wanted faster scale, faster growth, better multiples, all of that, they've gone asset light and they've seen the opportunity on the franchise model, on the management model. And I'm just curious, like if at some point the people that are coming in from the short term rental side of things and are looking at, oh well, now I'm excited about buying a hotel or buying a motel or all of those things, like will they eventually realize that, I mean, yes, there's some arbitrage that can be possible still, but is it scalable, right? Is it scalable? And I'm just, and this is a personal opinion, right? Like curiosity wise, I'm just curious to know if at some point those individuals will just tell themselves, what, I should just go asset light and manage.
Yeah,
So
I think it's very telling that a lot of the Hiltons and the Marriotts, a lot of them they don't own those buildings. Somebody else owns those buildings. They're just hired as management, and they realized a long time ago that there was better money in the management side of these hotels than in the actual owning. I'm sure they still own some of them, but in reality, it's investors who own them and then they hire management to do that. It's hospitality can be risky, as even right now we're entering a time where you're seeing the reportings of some of the travel has been pushed down. The costs have become too much for people, and so there's going to be some pullback in travel, or the taste in which the way that people travel has changed. So a lot of Americans with money are heading to Europe. They're not going to wherever else, Chicago or wherever else they want to travel. The way people travel and how they want to travel and what it looks like changes over time. And so if you stay stagnant in this industry, eventually you're going to get caught. And it can hurt you. And so you always have to be ready to change with the times and be able to change how your asset serves the people who are wanting to come and stay there. That's why I think design is so important. I use the example of Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg. It's like nobody just gets a regular house to rent in Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg. It's like when you go, you expect to stay in the cabin, and you expect there to be a chawed mare carved out front, and you expect there to be a hot tub and some sort of view over a mountain. And if you're not giving that to the people, then you're not going to do as well as the other places. I try and focus that way here in Louisville with our stuff. We try and make it very bourbon themed, horse themed. That's why the people come here. And so you have to know your market, and you have to be able to be very flexible with that market and pricing wise, and just understand that this is not a stagnant asset class. It's constantly having to reinvent itself in some way, shape, or form to serve the client better. And so as we grow and we change and we look at different paths, whether it's hotels or motels, you have to go into that knowing that over time, your idea that you may think is great now may have to be turned on its head because of the way that you service your clients. It's just constantly changing and what people want.
Love it. Jay, any final recommendations as far as resources goes, whether that's books, courses, masterminds, whatever it is that you have been involved in? I don't know if you've just learned everything on the School of Hard Knocks, or if there's
No.
been any, sort of books that have significantly impacted you and things of that nature. What can you share on that?
Yeah, my wife is complaining. I have way too many books stacked on my nightstand. You can see what's back over here. All
Right.
of these books, I pile them up. I read as much as I can because I believe that the history, this isn't anything new. People have done what we've done before, and they've written books on what we've done before, and their experiences are in those books. And
Yeah.
if we can learn those experiences and how they handled those situations, then it can help apply to what we're doing now. The most recent book that I read was Unreasonable Hospitality. It's a fantastic book about going and just taking the expectations that diners have at these restaurants that this man was working, and just going over the top. And it made the experience of the diners, it was just so incredible. They just couldn't believe it. And that's, as I read that, it was part of me realizing that, hey, if you don't just meet the expectations, but you exceed the expectations of the guests, you're going to do fine. You just really need to take that fear. It's almost a limiting mindset of, oh, well, if I do this, that's $1 out of my pocket and my return is only going to be X. I'm constantly trying to think of ways to add value to the stays of the guests who come and stay with us.
I think that mindset is so crucial, and that is a book that we talk a lot about in the podcast. And yeah, it's a great recommendation for sure
Oh,
for
yeah.
anyone listening. I love it. All right, Jay. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I could keep you here for hours. This has been super fun, super insightful. I've learned a ton, and I'm sure the audience has as well. So thank you so much for your time. Where can people connect and stay in touch?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, and that's where I do a lot of my stuff. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Love it. All right. Thank you so much, Jay, for taking the time.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right.